Mute. Mute. On. Close.
So far, I understood the speech.
Just wait, now's the hard part. Okay, good evening. So we begin again this week. Once again, the cycle of reading through the Torah from the beginning for another year. It's a good opportunity to talk a little bit about the mitzvah of Shnai Mikra ve'echad Targum, of reading the parsha, Shnai Mikra, reading the parsha twice, and reading once the Targum, the translation, which Targum, what happens. The obvious problem we face when we think about this mitzvah is that the Targum is there to translate things, to explain it for us. What happens when we no longer understand the Targum? We still have to read the Targum, we have to read a different Targum. So we know going back, already this has not been our minhag for many centuries. There are some kehilot which still have this minhag, but it was originally that during the Kriyat Torah itself, that one would read from the Torah, would read the psukim, and would read the Targum as well. So everybody would hear the Kriyah, would hear the explanation, the translation. And as I mentioned, there are some communities who still do this, but for most of Am Yisrael, we don't read the translation anymore. One of the reasons is we don't understand that translation. It doesn't serve that purpose. So regarding what we're talking about now is not the Kriyah in Shul, not the public Kriyat Torah, but the individual Shnai Mikra ve'echad Targum. The Gemara in Brachot tells us, Leolam Yashlim Adam Parshiyotav Matzibur Shnai Mikra ve'echad Targum, that a person should read the parsha themselves twice, together with the Targum, with the translation. If you do this, your days and your years will be lengthened. Okay, so who wouldn't want that scope? So I think there's a number of questions. I've already mentioned some of them. You know, the idea of what this Targum is, what do we do when we don't understand it? Why do we need to read it twice? Can once be enough? A few others, and through some of these details, we're trying to answer some of these questions and see, I think there are 2, maybe 3 different understandings that we can come to. Some of the poskim point out in terms of what the purpose and what the function and what's really behind this idea of Shnai Mikra ve'echad Targum. So the first question is, who is the Gemara talking to? Who is required to do this? We might have thought, and the simple understanding might have been, that somebody who is not in Shul, who doesn't hear the Kriyat Torah for whatever reason, therefore, Yashlim Parshiyotav Matzibur, meaning you couldn't come to Shul, you couldn't hear the reading. The Kriyat Torah, according to most poskim, is a Chovat HaTzibur, not a Chovat HaYachid. It's incumbent on the community, not on the individual. But the parsha is still going to be read, but if the individual can't be there and can't read it, you should read it at home. And we find a similar concept regarding Tefillah. Tefillah b'tzibur, obviously a person should try and do their best to daven together with the minyan. If a person has a reason why they can't be with the minyan, so the next best thing is to daven at the same time that they know that the tzibur is davening. Second best. So maybe there would have been a thought to say, the Gemara here is indicating the same idea. You can't be in shul, you can't hear the parsha. Read it at home, read it yourself. Get why twice, Targum will get it. And there is such an opinion in the Rishonim. The Hagot Maimoniot brings the opinion of the Ravan, one of the Rishonim, who says this Gemara is talking about somebody who didn't hear the parsha, didn't come to shul. But the simple reading of most of the poskim, most of the Rishonim, Achronim, the Rambam writes this explicitly. The Shulchan Aruch uses the same language. You say that even if a person comes to shul, even though a person hears the Kriyah each and every week, nonetheless, you still have to go home. You still have to read it. Well, ideally, before you heard it on Shabbat, you need to read it twice together with the Targum. So first explanation, first understanding of how this works and what it's based on. So there's a Tshuva in Rav Moshe. Rav Moshe Feinstein was asked the following. You know, somebody who's a problem that we all have. Somebody's very, very busy. They don't have the time. They don't have time to read Shnai Mikra ve'echad Targum. Okay, but the question comes, not because they're working, not because they're busy. Somebody who's learning all day, but they're learning anyway. They don't want to take the time to sit and learn, do Shnai Mikra. They're learning Gemara, whatever it is. Are they exempt? Are they patur? Now the question is not without a havamin. Meaning we know that Osek b'mitzvah patur min mitzvah. There's a concept when somebody is engaged in a mitzvah, they're exempt from other mitzvah. There is a concept in the Gemara of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai v'chaverav, who were engaged in Torah all day, every day, to the extent that they were exempt from tefillah, because Talmud Torah is Doraita and tefillah is Dorabanan. Okay, this is not practical halacha for anybody today, but there is such a concept. So Rav Moshe answers the following. He says, first of all, we have a Gemara in Kiddushin that tells us how a person should divide up their time in learning. We have Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud. Right? We have. Okay, you're gonna have to wait. So we have Mikra, Mishnah, and Talmud, and the Gemara says a person should divide up their time, should split it third for Mikra, discussion whether that refers just to Chumash or to Tanakh, a third for Mishnah, a third for Talmud. We don't really do this today. This is not, most yeshivas, most of the curriculum, the schedule is not split up in these three ways. So why is that? So Tosfot writes, Rabbeinu Tam says, actually, if you just learn Gemara, you just learn Talmud Bavli, that's enough. You're covered for everything. Because it's got psukim in it, it's got mishnayot in it, it's got the explanation. You're doing everything. The word Talmud Bavli means Babylonian Talmud, but Bavli also means Balu Bahakol, meaning everything is mixed up in it, everything is included. He says, that's okay, you've fulfilled your obligation of Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud by learning Gemara. That's what Tosfot says. The Rambam writes that this idea that everything has to be a third in terms of allocation of time, that's when a person starts learning. But once you've learned for a little bit, you've been learning for a while, you've mastered everything on a basic level, then you can spend most of your time learning Gemara, but you still have to spend some time doing Torah Shabbat. So says Rav Moshe Feinstein, says even according to the Rambam, you still need to spend, it's not going to be a third, you still need to spend some of your time learning Torah Shabbat, not just Torah Shabbat. He says that you wouldn't say, by Rabbi Shimon and Chaverav, we say that they're patur from tefillah, which is Rabbanan, but this is Talmud Torah, which is Doraita. In other words, he says that the obligation of Shnai Mikra v'Echad Targum is the obligation of Talmud Torah. I say that it sounds obvious, but when we see some of the other interpretations, not necessarily, there might be another way to view it. But that's clear. That's clear of Moshe that Shnai Mikra is about learning presumably about understanding as well, knowing what we're reading, understanding why. We still haven't explained why we have to read it twice. But so the Sefer HaChinuch also, in his introduction, he has a beautiful language. He says that when we read the Torah with the tzibur, he says it's le'orer lev ha'adam la Torah mitzvot, that should awaken one's heart to fulfill Torah and mitzvot, having that experience of hearing the Kriyat Torah b'tzibur. He says that, but also at home, you need to learn it in order that you understand it better. So there's a concept of the limud, the intellectual, the understanding, that it's maybe not enough just hearing it in shul. One has to go, one has to learn, one has to study, and delve a little bit deeper. Okay, that is one understanding. Maybe understanding number two, similar but slightly different nuance. So the poskim go into a lot of detail in terms of what is the best way to read Shnai Mikra v'Echad Targum. You may have seen, you have these books that are printed today. You can get, there's a book called the Chumash, which is a simple way to do it. But there are books called Shnai Mikra v'Echad Targum, and you have each pasuk which is printed twice, and then the Targum is printed, so you can just read through. So there are those who say you should do each pasuk. You should read pasuk, then read the pasuk again, and then read the Targum. There are those who say you should read the entire parsha, the entire sidra, and then read the entire thing again, and then read the entire Targum. There are those who say that within the parshiot, it's split up into smaller parshiot, Parsha Ptucha and Parsha Stuma. So each one of those parshiot, read that, and then read it again, and then read the Targum. Aruch HaShulchan says, do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. He says that the fact is, the poskim, the Gemara doesn't discuss it. Therefore, it's not ma'akev. It's not going to hold you back. Do whatever works best for you and how you understand. But,
how did we get to Shnai
Mikra?
So it was already in the times of Babylon.
The Gemara says, "L'olam yashlem adam parashiot Shnai Mikra v'Echad Targum." Says you have to read it twice with the Targum. It doesn't say exactly what order to read pasuk or how to do it.
What do you base it on?
I don't.
how do you get to it, you know?
That's what we're trying to explain. So one is that it's got to do with just with the learning and the understanding. That is, we have a cycle. We read through the Torah, the Parshiot in the Tzibur every year, and so too an individual has to do the same. Okay. So Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, in Introduction to Emet Yaakov, he suggests the following. He says there is something unique about learning Torah, learning Mikra, as in Chumash, versus Nevi'im and Ketuvim, which is, he says that if you read Chumash, if you read the text of the Torah, even if you don't understand it, but just by reading it, this is directly Chamisha Chumshei Torah, directly the words from Kadosh Baruch Hu, you still fulfill the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, even if you don't understand. Obviously better if you understand. You should aspire. But just by reading there is a mitzvah. Because when it comes to Nevi'im and Ketuvim, not the case. There you have to understand. And he says that's why it's called Mikra. Mikra means to read, right? That's what it is. So he suggests the following. He says the way you should do Shnai Mikra Ve'echad Targum is like, first read through the entire parsha. That's the first Mikra. Then go through pasuk, read each pasuk first with the Mikra and then with the Targum. And what are we doing? What are we showing? What are we pointing out? That the first time you read through the whole thing, as if you don't understand, right, without the translation, show that just by reading there is value. That's Mikra number one. Afterwards, it's Mikra with Targum as well. That is going to be the second time that you're reading it and understanding it, and that's how he suggests to do it. So again, similar like the first understanding we said. There's definitely an element of limud, definitely an element of learning, of Talmud Torah. Even if you read it the first time and don't understand, but there's still a value of Talmud Torah. Those are the first two. The third interpretation, which I will start to mention briefly, and we'll carry on tomorrow because we have 2 minutes left. But there's a big machloket what to do now with this Targum. Because as we said, originally in the days of the Gemara, they had the Targum. That was what they understood. You read the psukim, you don't necessarily understand them. You read Targum Onkelos, okay, you understand what you've read. Today, most people are going to read Targum Onkelos, they're going to be even more confused. And just, what does it mean? What is it? So this is not a new problem. The Rosh writes 700 years ago. He says, today we don't understand the Targum anymore. So what do we do? He says, nonetheless, the Targum was given with Ruach HaKodesh, and there's still value to it. But he suggests maybe instead of the Targum, we can now read Perush. Which Perush? Perush Rashi. Right? Rashi, all of his words are based on Chazal. We know it's easy to understand, relatively, it's authentic, it's rooted in the Masorah. That's the Perush we can. The Beit Yosef says there are those who say better to read the Targum, those who say better to read the Perush. He says Yerei Shamayim should do both. That's what he paskins in Shulchan Aruch. He says you should read the Targum and you should read Perush Rashi. But we'll talk some more tomorrow about which one is better. There's a very interesting machloket amongst the Mefarshim, and we'll see what it teaches us about this entire process, this entire mitzvah. Rabbi Kenigsberg Mincha Maariv Shiur Oct.